This is Radio Ukraine International with the weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Doing Business covers current economic developments in and concerning Ukraine and gives topical information as well as immediate and longer-term economic forecasts. It is what we think might give you food for thought and help you see Ukraine through the economic angle. And here is the second part of the program about the Ukrainian Capital Markets webinar. For some years, the Ukrainian capital markets have been held back by a lack of activity and liquidity due to major gaps and inconsistencies in the underlying legislation. A new law comes into force this summer and aims to restart the Ukrainian capital markets, bringing legislation into the line with EU capital market laws. The creation of the National Investment Fund could also have a transformational impact, preparing key state-owned enterprises for initial public offerings. Stephen Butler, managing partner of the Strategy Council, brought together a panel of respected capital market practitioners and key officials to debate whether the measures being taken are enough to stimulate the emergence of Kyiv as a regional financial center. The following speakers participated in the Ukrainian Capital Markets webinar are Olga Magalецka, Office Head of the National Investment Council, Аюна Нечаєва, Head of Europe Primary Markets at the London Stock Exchange, Volodymyr Kuzyo, Head of NBFI and Capital Markets USAID, Irina Kravchenko, Deputy Head of the EBRD Office in Ukraine, Maksym Libanov and Yuri Boyko, Commissioners of the National Securities and Stock Market Commission of Ukraine, and Orest Matveychuk, Senior Associate with CMS Cameron McKenna, Nabaro Olsvang. The moderator of the webinar was Igor Alekhov, Partner and Head of Banking and Finance Practice at CMS Cameron McKenna, Nabaro Olsvang. My first question is to Olga Magalецka. Could you tell us, please, what the Ukrainian National Investment Fund actually is? What is the idea? Why does the Ukrainian government think about investment funds? What role should your investment fund play in the development of capital markets?
For me, let's start a little with the history of fund of funds. Because here, saying the National Investment Fund for Ukraine, there is basically no real concept under that naming, because, for example, with Dmitro Tarabakin and with the EBRD before, half a year ago, we understood under the National Investment Fund, or we called it NIF, something else, not that one which was mentioned in the government decree. So I believe it's more about the first state fund of fund, and let's talk firstly about the history and in other countries and how possible to implement them in Ukraine. So one of the first state fund of funds was the European Investment Fund, which was established in the European Investment Bank in 1997 to invest in SMEs, in SME equity through venture funds. And the two main goals pursued by founders were to increase employment in the European Union and to develop high-tech SMEs. If we look at the efficiency of the first investments, employment in IF-backed firms increased by almost 30% compared to 0.7% for the EU. And the internal rate of return was slightly lower than the average return of the best venture funds in the European Union. That was about 30%. So fund of funds are commonly used by private investors and sovereign entities. And there are some examples of the government-backed funds. So the Central Europe Fund of Funds for Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Slovenia, that was established jointly by domestic governments and the European Investment Fund, seeking to indirectly support SMEs and improve the investment ecosystem in the region. Fund's assets amounted to 100 million euro and focuses in tech ICT, life science, and energy. Fund of funds like Mubadala Capital Ventures from United Arab Emirates invests into growth technology funds and early stage funds that exercise active management of their portfolios with access to boards and portfolio companies. And in China, for example, a fund of funds mostly looking on high-tech and advanced manufacturing companies. All funding was provided by the government and reached almost $600 billion. And more than 1,600 investment funds raised financing from these government funds. The European Investment Fund manages many funds in European Union, and their investment professionals evaluate potential companies, mitigate risks, monitor investments, and more. At the European level, the EIF is regulated by the AMFD directive, and this directive defines tax policy, legal status, investors' protection, requirements for investment managers, etc. And in addition to European legislation, there should be modern legislation of collective investment schemes at the national level. And in Ukraine, investment legislation has changed very little in recent years. The issue of implementing the European AIFMD directive and UCITS4 directive has been raised already. Now, Ukrainian laws do not allow the state, municipalities, and legal entities with state shares more than 20% to be owners of mutual funds, including for purposes of fund of funds. And a separate regulation for such funds, let's say, requirements to the assets management, non-interference of state, etc., would be in essence in order to minimize political pressure and allegations in misconduct. So far, the Cabinet of Ministers has created a national investment fund as a state enterprise. In the future, for greater transparency and efficiency, it is reasonable to transform enterprise in a joint venture with several founders that receive a portion of financing from IFIs, including based on loan facility or other terms. And the government must provide funds for investing in the most promising industries in Ukraine. Let's define them as well. It should be funds from the budget, part of the profit of state-owned enterprises, for example, income from the natural resources rent, part of the balance of payment surplus or central bank reserves. These are several models, let's say, all combining. And financial presence of the Ukrainian government should be a comfort message to external investors who are usually quite concerned about risks associated with Ukraine and Ukrainian business. And investing via fund of funds may also appear reasonably secure. It's firstly a multi-tier investment framework under fund of funds helps mitigate market volatility risks and risks arising in connection with inflation, the counterparty defaults. And secondly, fund managers and those administering underlying assets through investment funds would usually undergo due diligence seeking to establish their high-level industry expertise and background. And this should help avoid any misconduct or part of the fund management terms. And thirdly, a broad asset base of underlying portfolio helps maintain investment diversification. In view of the tax benefits that investors enjoy under mutual fund scheme, as well as the common practices exercised in relation to the legal structuring of fund of funds internationally, it appears practical to apply a similar arrangement to the fund of funds in Ukraine, and it's subject to certain changes of Ukrainian laws as well. And also in the next draft law governing the state budget for 2022 should be incorporated relevant changes and also challenges that certain portion of public financing will be allocated to fund the activities of state fund of funds. Regardless those challenges, implementation of fund of funds in Ukraine in overall appear to be a natural response to shortage of capital and also should foster investments in a number of strategic sectors, which assumably should be targeted for the fund of fund sector.
Do you believe that Ukraine can afford to have the National Fund of Funds? Why would the Verkhovna Rada support allocations of funds to this fund of funds?
That was mentioned that state may provide from 10 up to 20% of the mutual, say, amount of those funds allocated from Ukraine. And everything else should come through external funds like Mubadala or Qatar Investment Authority or any other, say, IFIs who would like to also to be a joint investment. And with those amounts from different investment authorities, let's say, that would be a fund sufficient enough to invest in other projects and in other funds, like venture funds also. So that's not only, and the source is not only and primarily goes from the budgets, from the state budget of Ukraine. That's a mutual investment of others.
Said Olga Magaletska. You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. Last but not least, and here is the question to all the speakers of the webinar. You have sufficient experience in the development of the financial capital market. What volume, in your opinion, can the derivatives reach, say, in 1 year's time? What are the new capital markets going to be? What will be the instruments? Irina Kravchenko answers.
The first difficult call, what can I say? I think, especially following Ores's presentation, I would say there are good possibilities because we are talking about very short-term period of corporate bonds development and especially green bonds. Because now there is a working group, as far as I understand now, I know there is a working group organized for green bond development. But at the moment, it's focused mainly on state-backed or state green bonds. And we think there is a good potential for development corporate green bonds. As EBRD, we're currently working on alignment of Ukraine bank prudential framework with EU standards. It's actually, there is a good potential. It's called Unfunded Guarantee for Growth product with EU banks operating in Ukraine. So to give them access, to align this regulation, to give them access to the local domestic market at the moment. So it's another one, a little bit movement. We hope it's going to be completed and there will be a little bit more activity in this area. About our favorite with Vladimir Next UA project, I hope we will be able at least to finalize and to find a good model. But in 1 year period, it's unlikely going to be. And in terms of CCP, as far as I know, USAID made a presentation that is quite doable in 1 year. I have my reservations about that, but let's see. I don't want to kind of low down the optimism in the market. This is what we see quite possible. About NIF, I think I would less optimistic because it would require more preparation and stronger support from the government. It will be a little bit more difficult to implement. And there is a potential from IFIs actually for hryvnia-denominated bonds to be participant. There is also, this is like a little bit quicker solution or the products which will be easier or quicker to implement.
Yeah, actually, I partially agree with Irina that the Next UA concept and Next UA project wouldn't run until 1 year. It would require at least 3-5 years for different entities or functions to be established in Ukraine. With regards to the CCP, at least 18 to 24 months is like the best running way. So at least 2 years we need to establish CCP, but it's not an easy process. The same for like IT systems and so on and so forth. But it has to be calibrated, having in mind, the Ukrainian market and Next UA concept. And we've been discussing all these approaches. But, if we want to get the point B in 2 years from now, we should start now. And from the USAID FST perspective, it is important that we don't have to do everything from scratch. As for now, we are managing, ongoing activities as a target operating model for a CCP by Barney, which has been presented indeed last week. Next week, we are presenting IT solution for a trade repository, which will serve for collection, validation, and storage the market data. And simultaneously, we are drafting the regulations on clearing, reporting, licensing, and so on and so forth, which is needed for the capital markets law coming to force. Yeah, we will move definitely forward with the feasibility study. We anticipate to have as much information as possible on, and we are keen on, IPOs on state-owned companies in Ukraine. So, and I think these different pieces might create, the only picture which would be attractive for not only investors, but for existing and potential market participants in Ukraine.
Said Volodymyr Kuzyo, head of NBFI and Capital Markets, USAID. Аюна Нечаєва replies.
Thank you. As I mentioned, there is a huge excitement in the international markets about Ukrainian story. I think within a year we will see a lot of progress. As previous speaker said, perhaps more corporate bonds, perhaps a green bond by a corporate or by the sovereign. I certainly hope for a first privatization deal, likely by one of the banks that I think are more prepared. Those who already have investment by the AFC or EBRD, I think they have a huge potential to join the international markets and domestic markets within a year.
What should I say? In terms of, let's say, funds creation, I need to remind everybody that actually the legislation creation timeline and for going it through RADA as well, it takes a lot of time, to be honest. And if you go fast with the initiative, so you need to start now in order to be positively voted and with the fully admitted legislation in 1 year, and having, let's say, high political will to do that in mind. So, honestly speaking, I'd rather see maybe few of the IPOs, hope so, but maybe that could be done, and that could be just few companies only, but that could be done only without any kind of fund by that time. I believe if you need to see the results in 1 year, so with the legislation changes, it's not going to be that fast. And for me, for capital markets, I would like to see more instruments, more actually something what should be traded. Yeah. So in this situation, at least if we have few more IPOs, that would be fine. At least we have something what we can invest and what to trade.
Said Olga Magaletska. You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. Maksym Libanov says about his expectations for the next year.
I would say that I'm pretty much optimistic by nature. I hope that we'll have at least one IPO, we will have at least one commodity exchange, we will have at least one clearing house, we will have at least a couple of regularly traded derivatives. You should make a high bar to, otherwise it's nothing to do.
The stage is for Yuri Boyko, commissioners of the National Securities and Stock Market Commission of Ukraine. The speech is translated from the Russian language.
Что будет через год? Чего ожидать? Какие ожидания?
Yuri, your expectations
Смотрите, я
in a
оптимист.
year. By my nature, I'm an optimist. And thanks to what we have in the market for the moment, for not everything is that bad. For one thing, we have a memorandum of understanding and we have draft bill 378 that secures availability of the financial instruments to run the show. But where we don't play is field of instruments. Then as joint ventures and collective investment funds, they are in place, and the current banking infrastructure does allow an investment. But the policy of the National Commission regarding raising new instruments will bring good result in 1 year. And as we expected, we will be able to declare short-term victories thanks to new instruments that are upcoming this autumn. For all the instruments that might emerge in the market and that can exemplify best practices for new companies that will enter the Ukrainian market and that will create new liquidity, we will be there to help them with some resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. There are two opposite problems in Ukraine. On the one hand, there are people who have money but don't know where to invest it. On the other hand, there is the Ukrainian economy, which is in dire need of investment. Moreover, these two problems continue to exist in parallel, not allowing either citizens to live better or the economy to grow. Solving these problems simultaneously is the task of the capital market. That is, the capital market acts as an intermediary that helps citizens turn their savings into capital and invest this capital in the economy. The economy, using this capital, will be able to grow and after a certain time return the money invested with interest to citizens, and consequently they would become richer. The new law will give Ukrainians additional opportunities to preserve and increase their savings. This is just the right time as bank deposits are becoming less and less profitable because of the National Bank's policy of reducing the discount rate. It is done in order to make lending available in Ukraine. In addition, this accordingly affects the rates on deposits, and throughout the world, the profitability of bank deposits is minimal. Therefore, someone who wants to earn more will have to look for an alternative, and the securities market can become such an opportunity for them. Nevertheless, one of the main obstacles to the full-fledged operation of the Ukrainian capital market is the lack of people's trust in non-bank financial institutions. Many people remember how the general corporatization ended in the 1990s. After becoming owners of shares, most Ukrainians never received any profit. Banking crises have also discouraged them from giving their savings into the wrong hands. At the same time, trust is one of the main conditions for the functioning of capital markets. And trust can only appear if there is reliable protection of buyers of securities, a reliable control system, etc. The new law is designed precisely to provide such mechanisms of protection and control. The new law opens up new business opportunities. It is also expected that the development of trade infrastructure in line with EU directives will reduce the risk of contract defaults. Businesses and investors have yet to see and assess the practical impact of the new capital markets law, as its effectiveness depends on the proper enactment and implementation of bylaws by the National Securities and Stock Market Commission. That was Radio Ukraine's weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Tune in every Wednesday for more.